Good morning and welcome to the 25th meeting of 2024 in Session 6 of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee. We have apologies from Marie McNair this morning. Our first agenda item is to agree to take item 3, which is consideration of today's evidence on the report of the Scottish Parliament's gender-sensitive audit in private. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are all agreed. Our second agenda item is to take evidence on the report of the Scottish Parliament's gender-sensitive audit. And we'll hear from two panels this morning, and I therefore welcome our first panel, Kat Murphy, Executive Director of Engender, who is joining us online, Dr Rebecca Mason, Research and Policy Lead at the Young Women's Movement, and Talat Yaqub, who is a consultant and co-founder of Women 50/50. You're all very welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. So I refer members to papers 1 and 2, and I'll invite each of our witnesses to give us an opening statement. And I'll start with Kat Murphy, please.
Thanks, Convener, and apologies for not being able to join you in person. I appreciate you accommodating me online. As you mentioned, my name is Kat Murphy. I am the Executive Director of Engender. Engender is a leading national policy and advocacy organisation in Scotland. We've been working for 30 years to secure women's social, political and economic equality and realise women's rights in Scotland. And one of our key priorities is ensuring women's equal representation and participation in politics. We fed into the gender-sensitive audit of the Parliament via membership of the advisory group, the steering committee, and we were really pleased with the outcome of that report, and we're really pleased to see progress in implementing many of its recommendations. We also work at a range of levels, undertaking research and campaigning to ensure women's increased representation at local government, Scottish Government level, Scottish Parliament level and within Westminster. Working with Elect Her and Women 50/50, we've undertaken a campaign in recent years entitled Making It Happen for 2027 that aims to particularly increase women's representation in local government. We also work extensively with political parties and provide training and development through our Equal Representation in Politics Toolkit. This provides a tool to audit, a tool for parties to audit their internal practices and gives them pointers and recommendations on everything from kind of internal party culture to candidate selection processes, comms and engagement. So I'll stop there and pass over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Rebecca Mason, please.
Very much. So the Young Women's Movement is Scotland's national organisation for young women's leadership and rights. We are informed, shaped, led by and for young women who want meaningful change in their lives and across society. And for 100 years, we support all young women and girls across Scotland to lead change on issues that matter to them. We believe it is for young women to determine the changes that they want and need, and we provide them with the resources, networks and platforms to collectively challenge inequality across Scotland. So as an organisation, we meet young women where they're at, and we work in lots of different ways, places and communities across Scotland. We create safe spaces where young women gather to learn, explore issues that matter to them and to lead change. And today I'm going to mainly focus on our Young Women Lead programme. So this supports young women to make real change at local and national levels while developing their leadership skills, knowledge and their confidence. Young Women Lead began in 2017 as a leadership programme for young women aged 16 to 30. It provides participants with a unique and exciting safe space to share their experiences and work together to create real tangible change. And initially operating on a national level with the Scottish Parliament, it has evolved over time into regional programmes across Scotland. And since 2017, we've worked with 127 young women leaders. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Talat Yaqub, please.
Thank you, Convener. As been mentioned, my name is Talat Yaqub. I'm an independent consultant and researcher as well as being co-founder of Women 50/50. Women 50/50 was launched back in 2014. We've been doing this for 10 years. It is a voluntary, non-funded or community campaign which has cross-party and no-party support. Its purpose is to amplify the voices of women, but particularly consider legislated candidate quotas, which would mean that there was an impetus on all political parties to put forward at least 50% women candidates. We have a wide-ranging support in the third sector and across parties too. These quotas already exist in some form or another in over 90 countries across the world, and we strongly believe that without that kind of baseline legislative change, we will not see the type of activity required from political parties whilst it remains voluntary. I should also note to the committee that I am currently conducting research on behalf of Elect Her, commissioned to do research particularly on political cultures and how they can be improved. That won't be published until very early in the new year, but I will request for it to be shared with the committee once it is at publication. In terms of Women 50/50's position, we hear from women on a regular basis about what it is that prevents them from accessing politics. Whilst much of it is absolutely about the way political parties conduct themselves, the mechanisms they have internally, the reporting mechanisms in particular, there is also the wider conversation that needs to happen about societal, historic and systemic inequality, particularly how that illustrates itself via online abuse, which becomes in-person abuse because it is permitted and enabled, and this is disproportionately more likely to happen to women of colour, migrant women, LGBT women and disabled women, and that intersection of inequality has to be at the forefront of the work that we do here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to questions from the committee, and I'm going to start us off and ask that we get just right to the basics to begin with, and ask you, why is it important to have equal representation with women and men in the Scottish Parliament? And I'll come to Kat, please.
Thanks, Convener. So, I think at the most basic level, it's an issue of kind of fairness and justice and democracy to ensure that our communities, the widest diversity of our community is represented in our parliamentary and elected forum. So I think that's, at the most basic level. I think similar to that, minoritised, marginalised communities and women often have unique, or not unique, but very kind of specific perspectives on how policy impacts their lives that differ from the historic norm in terms of policy that's been developed primarily by white middle-class men. So women and minoritised and marginalised groups have much more kind of experience at the coalface in terms of how those policies impact their lives, whether they improve them, whether they don't. So I think having a greater diversity of people elected into spaces, parliamentary spaces, improves the quality, or has enormous potential to improve the quality of the policy that is made in those spaces, and ultimately the outcomes. And I think that benefits society as a whole. So that's just kind of on the basic level. But there has been extensive research done on these issues globally, and a major study undertaken by the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London has done a kind of meta-analysis of all of this research, and it's looked at kind of 500 studies across the globe, although the vast majority of those were in North America and Europe, and it found some very key trends in terms of representation of women within political decision making, and particularly women in leadership. So it found that greater levels of women elected into parliamentary spaces doesn't just benefit women but benefits society as a whole. Women leaders are seen to make seem to create more equal and caring societies when they are given greater levels of power. There's evidence to suggest that more women in politics leads to better implementation of welfare, education, health, service infrastructure and better policy in these spaces, as women have a specific understanding of how these systems work for the most marginalised. There's also evidence that women tend to have a more cooperative and inclusive leadership style that benefits parliamentary spaces. Also, across the globe, there's indications that more women in parliaments can lead to less levels of corruption and greater overall trust in democracy. without creating competition, there's also indication that women tend to do more work within their constituencies than male elected representatives. So there's an enormous amount of research that indicates that the strength of democracy is improved by greater diversity within our parliamentary systems, and that the quality of the policy it produces is improved overall. Yeah. But that's kind of at the most basic level. I think that kind of summarises it.
Thank you so much, Kat. That is quite a lot to absorb. Thank you so much for that. It's really important that we get to the bones of that. Rebecca, please.
Yeah, just to follow on really from what Kat was saying there, you know, there's so much research to show that there's improved decision making when we have equal representation in parliaments. The UN Women find that women's involvement in impacts decision-making in a positive way. Examples include better childcare in Norway and more drinking water projects in India linked to higher levels of female representation. It also shows women that their voices, their views and their experiences matter when they're equally represented in their parliaments. Decision-making is better when diverse experiences are represented at the table, and this is proven. We would also note that diversity doesn't just obviously stop at gender. Our representatives should reflect society in all different sorts of ways, whether that is based on age, race, culture, religion, disability, or socioeconomic position. And it also shows that there is more increased consideration of women's priorities when women are in Parliament. Research in other parliaments shows that the increased presence of women has an impact on moving issues like violence against women and girls and women's health onto the political agenda. And other studies highlight positive impacts on issues relating to women's work, finances and equality under the law. And also, I would argue that increased participation of women in democratic processes makes young women want to also be involved in the process, even if they're not standing in Parliament. So increased numbers of women in politics shows and encourages women to contact their own representatives and participate more as citizens. I'm happy to talk about this later, but from what came from our Young Women Lead report, and I have copies here today if anyone would like to read it, there just seems to be a kind of lack of trust in the political system amongst young women at the moment in Scotland. And this puts them off engaging in democratic processes. Young women have told us that, you know, sometimes they're even put off voting because they don't think that it matters or anything will change. So, you know, we would argue that that's one of the main reasons why it's important to have equal representation, so young women can see themselves in their elected representatives.
Yeah, thank you so much. Talat, please.
Thank you. What has been said has been really comprehensive, so I won't duplicate anything there. I'll just add that one of the reasons why we count the number of women who are in politics is because it's one illustration and example of progress in society. So we have to approach the underrepresentation of women and what I prefer to refer to as the overrepresentation of men in politics as a democratic deficit. If we talk about it in those terms, we respond to it as a democratic need and urgency to tackle that issue. Furthermore, along with what's been said already, not just what happens in politics, but that 51% being represented in politics has a consequence on what media looks like, which experts are engaged within media and wider public institutions, and where women's visibility matters in those wider spaces as well, because people often look at our democratic institutions as leading by example. And that's why it matters that women are fairly represented there. The other thing that I would add to that is, again, many of the studies that have been done and conducted have viewed women as a homogenous group. So it is very important that when we talk about that 51%, we are talking about women in their diversity, because it's that diversity that enables us to make good fit-for-purpose policy as a consequence.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll now move on to questions from Evelyn Tweed, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel, and thanks for all your evidence and your answers so far. Can you tell the committee what you feel are the barriers to women coming into politics, and how can they be removed? Talat first.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for that question. There's a number of different barriers, and I think that speaking to women over the last decade who have been involved and worked alongside Women 50/50, there's a whole range. One is there's still a very clear feeling that politics is a boys' club. There is a lack of outreach by political parties to women in a way that is beyond just a few weeks before candidate selections open, but something that is actually happening across the year, deep within communities, engagement, resourcing that kind of activity and outreach, and making sure that we are approaching women from marginalised communities to want to understand, engage and participate in politics. It's really important that we don't see that as some kind of deficit model where we need to do some training to educate women on politics. They are highly educated on politics. The competence and enthusiasm absolutely exists. It is access that is the problem. So it's where politics reaches them in communities. The second is, and a wider issue that concerns us across the board, is the erosion of trust in politics that prevents women and those from marginalised communities wanting to come forward and participate in politics. The third is, I've already mentioned it, but online abuse and wider abuse and the increasing hostility that exists within the political and public sphere, particularly for women. Women are disproportionately more likely to experience threats online simply for having an opinion. Unless that is tackled, that will act as a barrier for women coming forward and participating in politics. There's multiple. I'll say two more, and then I'll pass on to my other panellists. The other is time. So women are disproportionately more likely to have caring responsibilities and take on the care work. The idea that they can perhaps do campaigning in the evenings, at the weekend, without access to care and support means that they are more likely to deselect themselves from participating in politics. So that needs to be modernised and understood for women's lives. And finally, disposable income. Participating in politics also comes with the need to have the finances to campaign and engage, including the finances to access childcare, if that's what you require. So who has disposable income has an impact on who has access to politics. Thank you.
Yeah, and very much just to add to what Talat said. As part of the Young Women Lead programme, young women told us that politics just doesn't really feel accessible to them at the moment. Young women feel as if politicians do not communicate directly with them about the issues that matter to them and impact them in accessible and engaging ways. They told us they feel as if there's a lack of opportunities for meaningful engagement and a perceived lack of accountability for those in positions of power. Decision makers perhaps don't tend to meet young women where they're at, both physically and in terms of their knowledge and understanding. They described feeling perhaps a wee bit alienated by reports or committees in general, that they feel as if they can't engage with that at their level. There's a lack of trust in the political system from young women, which also puts them off engaging in democratic processes. Young women feel as if there's not a sufficient feedback loop for them to express their opinions or see active steps to make a real change. So this year, some young women in the programme told us that Parliament feels like too big a system to be able to have a tangible impact on. Young women are often not voting due to this disillusionment and their belief that nothing will change. Young women have told us that they have more trust in community groups where there is a will to include, listen to and make decisions on the best interests of young women. They also noted that there are few of these spaces for young women specifically, as community groups often tend to focus on children or older people. Interestingly, young women in rural areas told us that their elected representatives are more visible in their communities, while young women in urban areas told us that they rarely see politicians unless it's an election, and this influences how they perceive politics as a space. They told us that young women could feel more involved in politics if elected representatives connected with them in their communities or online. So meeting young women where they are at and engaging with them in an accessible way that meets their needs. One young woman on the programme stated, and I quote, "When we create a space for young women from all backgrounds to share, we gain deeper insights into solutions that benefit a wider community. As women, we care for our communities, not just ourselves." And we think this is really important, and I can echo some of the discussions we've been having about women as leaders. Just finally, I would say misogynistic harassment and abuse online is a huge barrier. We all know that politicians, of course, are subject to scrutiny from the media and from the public, as they rightly should be, as elected representatives. But what is not acceptable is the level of abuse and harassment that is directed at young women and women in general in politics. No wonder it's putting off young women to stand as politicians. Like, they just don't want to face that in everyday life. So that's huge, and it really needs to be tackled head on.
Kat, please.
Kat?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so obviously I would completely agree with everything that Talat and Rebecca have said. I'll maybe just kind of add a couple more. I would say that another part of it is the underinvestment in networks for women. So historically, there's evidence that women's networks within political parties, within parliamentary spaces, that could be cross-party networks as well, that can foster greater confidence and share information for women. These haven't been given the prioritisation and funding consistently that is needed. The other thing, just building on the points that Talat and Rebecca have also made, is around the financial barriers in standing for election. So overall, we know that women do not have the same financial power within society as men, but that standing for election does generate particular financial costs. There's related to that, we also see a trend of kind of being selected to stand within parties is often a factor in that is presenteeism. So if people have the time to do lots of leafleting, for example, or really be active in their local party and very visible in their local party, but there's a greater barrier for many women, particularly who have childcare, and there's costs associated with that being so present. So we know there are financial barriers for women that are higher. And then both Rebecca and Talat obviously mentioned culture, and there's the wider culture issues of violence against women and hostility towards women, and particularly marginalised women, black minority ethnic women, disabled women. But also I would say that cultures within a lot of political institutions and parliamentary institutions are not particularly attractive to women because they are seen as being particularly combative, hostile, dismissive, patronising, and I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done within these cultures to not only attract women to put themselves forward, but also to retain women, because we also have a particular issue of retention of women in elected roles, because we do see quite a high level of drop-off across the board.
Just follow up on what Kat said there. That's a really important point for me, because there's plenty of research that shows that elected women don't come back. They don't stay. So why is that? I mean, obviously there can be negative selection processes, but what else? Why aren't women staying in politics? Kat?
I'll quickly answer that and then hand over, obviously. I mean, I think that the systems that we have both inside our elected spaces and in terms of kind of candidacy, elections, external communications, all of these systems have largely been built up historically and with ingrained bias that works against women. So I think that to situate yourself within those systems is exhausting, and it takes a consistent level of pushback and resilience that can be very, very draining for people. And I think that you have to you have to exert so much energy and to be so tough and to push so hard to get elected, to then find yourself in an elected space where you're up against it even more. And I would imagine, I've never been elected to office, you would be able to speak to this better than me, but I would imagine that that's entirely demoralising and even probably more exhausting. So I think that we need to make sure that our parliamentary and our local government spaces are better. And I would say that the rate of progress we have seen, really significant progress in Scotland, particularly since the advent of the Scottish Parliament, but it's slow and it's non-linear. We take 2 steps forward and 1 back. So I think that a lot of women are not seeing a rate of change that is quick enough for them to be able to stay in those jobs or to put themselves forward. And then I would also say, I mean, the very obvious one is in recent decades, the vast increase in threats of violence and hostility, particularly in online spaces, but obviously there's been some really tragic cases where that has pushed over into violence, physical violence. So I think that those things have a major impact. So I think that it's becoming I fear that it's becoming potentially an even less attractive prospect for many women, and that the barriers are being broken down at a rate that is far too slow. One final point I would say is that we went to nearly all the parliamentary conferences over the last few years, and it was absolutely astonishing how consistently we were told, particularly by local councillors, the scale of abuse and violence they face online, and the lack of support that they're up against in terms of internally within parties, but also within local government. They're just expected to just deal with it, and so many of them were telling us that they weren't standing again just because of that alone.
So this is what the research I'm currently conducting is about, and how Scotland can create specific solutions to that, interviewing women who are in Scottish politics currently or who have left. So I hope to share that as soon as possible. I think it's really important that I say that in the 10 years since Women 50/50 has existed, it was an easier sell when we first launched Women 50/50 than it is now, to talk to women about participating in politics. And I have to be really honest with that. And that's not something that I like to say, because the whole purpose is the existence of that campaign is to encourage women to participate. But actually, the primary purpose of the campaign is to change the culture of politics. We have the women who want to participate. What we haven't succeeded on is the other part of that, the responsibility of the change of political cultures and the actors within it. That includes the institution of the Parliament, but it includes the Institute of Political Parties, taking genuine responsibility for tackling those cultures so that the women coming forward want to come in and don't just survive, thrive when they are there. That is the problem we currently have. So it's a harder sell for me now than it was when I launched Women 50/50, and I just have to be honest about that. From the work that I'm currently conducting, there's absolutely the issue around misogyny and threats and violence online. But one thing that I would include is that sometimes the conversation about trolling online is the dominant conversation, not the conversation about microaggressions, everyday sexism, patronising and dismissive attitudes that are encountered within the political setting. That is still something that exists. That is still something that we hear about from women directly, both at local and national level. So whilst we should absolutely be responding to threats online, it is for politics to lead by example in how society should operate widely. So therefore, those microaggressions, the everyday sexism, the inequalities, and the multiple overlapping inequalities that exist there need to be tackled, because that leadership by example needs to exist. We have what I would refer to as a bit of a revolving door. We're encouraging women to come in, they're staying for one term and then they're leaving. That means that there's more women with the narrative that this is not something I would encourage other women to participate in. That's a negative narrative that is being that is being taken back to women in communities. We can ill afford that, given the fact that we don't have fair representation of women already, particularly women from marginalised backgrounds. So if we are to do something about that, it's about political parties taking responsibility about the cultures that exist within their parties. And what is key to that is investment in reporting mechanisms that are independent from the political process, reporting mechanisms that can be trusted, reporting mechanisms that women can turn to and will see consequence. Without that, a culture is permitted and enabled that allows the status quo to exist. The same type of independent reporting also needs to exist within councils and parliament, so that if elected, and it's not within a political party, it is wider than that, there is a space within the democratic institution to be able to go to seek support. So it's reporting and support that is required.
I have probably nothing to add to what both Kat and Talat have said. I would say one thing that came up from the programme is that young women perceived a lack of employment rights in elected roles. So they spoke to female councillors and some MSPs, and there seems to be a limited lack of access to maternity leave and other employment rights, particularly financial and time barriers. So that would be one thing that we would add, as well as perhaps it's putting women off entering in the first place, or after a term they're just leaving.
Just a short sub to that, if I may. From what you've said in your research that you're carrying out, do you think that political parties should have a long-term strategy for encouraging women not only into politics, but in supporting them in how they stay in politics, not only the survive route, as you had outlined, but to thrive? Do you think all political parties should do that?
I do think that there's absolutely the need to do that. There's also an opportunity to change political cultures by having that within parties, but also making that survival success rather than just survival to be cross-party. That creates collaboration, and I understand that the gender-sensitive audit recommended a women's forum within the Scottish Parliament. I would caveat that it depends on the resourcing, the authority, the accountability that that forum actually has to be able to implement change. I think political parties need to have that strategy, but I think there's also a place for there to be a cross-party contingent to that. That creates different cultures. It's also creating collectivism, it's also creating cross-party working. There's a space for that too. Where we are locked into at the moment is, I think we've certainly won the battle somewhat on getting the numbers and having more women candidates in position. But a lot of this is done just a mere few months before an election. In the case of a by-election, sometimes a few days or weeks before a by-election. There is not the ongoing resourcing and strategy, as you've put it, which is investing in women, supporting women, and then helping them succeed, particularly those women who experience inequality, discrimination, sexism and misogyny when they're in Parliament or in local councils when they're elected. That support space, when they experience that, does not currently exist. A second caveat, multiple caveats now, but a second caveat to that is, whilst the focus is rightly on women, there is a long-term strategy needed on those who think that sexism and misogyny is acceptable within politics. So there's a strategy that's supporting women, but where is the long-term strategy on culture change, accountability and challenging sexism, misogyny and in fact any kind of discrimination across politics? Thank you.
That's me, Convener.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to questions from Maggie Chapman, please.
Thanks very much, Karen. Good morning to the panel. Thank you for joining us this morning. I want to follow on from Evelyn's questions around, I suppose, that culture element, which I'll come to. But in your opening remarks, you all talked about how your organisations or groups support women. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more, given the importance of that culture point, Talat, that you've just raised there, how is it that you and all panellists, what are the mechanisms when you are working with parties and with politicians? What are the things you use to try and start making a dent in that toxic culture? Talat, I'll come to you first.
Sure. I have to be honest that Women 50/50, because it's a non-funded voluntary organisation, isn't doing intensive work with political parties. It is the work that exists within Engender, which is excellent toolkit and project that exists within Engender that's doing most of that work. What I would say, though, is that all of that work is voluntary. All of the work to engage is voluntary, and it's whether you have people within political parties, and I will say it's usually women and those from marginalised backgrounds within political parties that will come to us as organisations and say, I would like this to be taken seriously within my political party, what can I do? So whilst experiencing the inequality, they also take on the burden of trying to tackle that inequality, whereas that should be something that is taken forward across the board within political parties. All of the engagement is voluntary, and as a consequence it is patchy, and it is often done by those who have experienced that inequality. In terms of the mechanisms that Women 50/50 uses, the main mechanism we use is data. So we're doing the counting of candidates. Now, as a voluntary organisation, we are have our spreadsheets out and we're counting all the candidates that we possibly can. And at local election time, that is thousands of candidates. This would be made a lot easier, and I think it's imperative that I say this to the committee, if Section 106 of the Equality Act was enacted, which would mean that, and that's for Westminster to pursue, which would mean that all political parties were mandated to publish their diversity data on their candidates. Currently, what we do is we put together information that is publicly available online without making assumptions about anyone's backgrounds, and we publish that. It is patchy and it is done on a voluntary basis. But even doing that creates the reputational damage if you are not meeting the threshold and representation threshold that we would expect of women. So the main mechanism we have is via evidence gathering and data that would be made a lot easier through the enactment of Section 106.
Thanks, and I take your point about what Women 50/50 is there to do, and I know others will pick up on the data point in a little bit more detail later. Kat, if I can come to you then, same kinds of question. What are the mechanisms around culture that Engender has engaged with political parties themselves?
Yeah, so as Talat mentioned, we have got a toolkit, which is quite a comprehensive toolkit, because this is the one thing I would say is that a lot of work has been done in Scotland, but also UK and internationally to kind of demystify and unpack these issues. So it's not that we're in the dark on it. There's a huge amount of evidence and a huge amount of recommendations out there that make clear what we need to do. So at Engender, we have a toolkit that is quite comprehensive and it essentially works as almost a kind of skeleton audit for parties to be able to go right through all of their systems and processes to audit what they're doing, and there's key recommendations and guidance including around culture, recruitment, assessment processes, etc. So we have the toolkit that we use. We also have two other things that we have is we worked with 17 other organisations, including Women 50/50 and the Young Women's Movement and others, to develop a theory of change on these issues, and it's signed up to by 17 different organisations that are working on these issues that make very clear recommendations right across the board for parties, for political, for parliamentary spaces, that set out really comprehensively what we think we need to do in Scotland. And then the other thing I would say is that we're also doing some research at the moment that again it's almost like a complementary piece in many ways to the work that Talat's doing, specifically on selection and candidacy and women's experiences of that. And we've just getting some of the information in the research now. It will not be published until the new year, but one of the things that's showing quite clearly is that there are organisations like, for example, Elect Her, who do amazing work in terms of supporting people to become candidates and supporting women once they have been elected. But what our research is indicating is that it's vastly insufficient. So just to give you an idea, the Engender and Elect Her were tiny organisations. We also don't necessarily have direct access to people, so it's fairly easy to identify MSPs once elected or MPs once elected, but it's much more difficult to identify candidates or people that are thinking about standing. We don't have the infrastructure to do justice to that task. And the other thing is, particularly, I would say that local councillors are particularly underserved because it's very difficult for us to actually even identify all the local councillors in Scotland. So we're really dependent on people who are thinking about standing, who are running for election or who have been elected, finding us and finding the support that we can give them. And we're not always able to reach the people that we need to because they're just not aware of it. So I would say that the voluntary sector, the third sector, can play a really important part in this. We want to push research. We have very clear recommendations. We've done a lot of work. But it's not a substitute for parties building it into their own infrastructure, because it's just far too difficult for us to be able to reach everybody that we need to. And actually, if you're standing as a candidate, you want to know that the party's going to support you and that they're going to take these issues of culture seriously.
Thanks very much, Kat. Rebecca, come to you.
Just to add on from what's been said already, you know, our Young Women Lead programme, we only have 14 spaces on that every year, and for the 2024 programme, which specifically focused on democratic wellbeing, we had over 150 applications. So there's a real need for young women who are interested in getting to know the political system and understand politics, but we as a third sector organisation that's also quite small, don't have the resources. We have recently done an evaluation of the programme since 2017 to see what young people told us about how they participated and what they wanted from it and where they went on. And I think that's really important to figure out where people have actually went on. And over 85% of the young women did go into professional development and leadership type roles. What we were told, what was really important, is bringing them into the parliamentary space, demystifying Parliament. So many young women just don't really understand what is going on in Parliament and how it affects them. So they asked for things like education on what democracy looks like in Scotland, how they can practically participate in democratic programmes, even like speaking to your local MSP rather than emailing them. Is there other opportunities out there for them? They argued that to kind of demystify the parliamentary process, they would appreciate more like video content from elected representatives and how to engage with them. And also explaining the types of the differences in Parliament, what a private member's bill is compared to a government bill, what do cross-party groups do, what does cross-party collaboration look like. So for us, it's demystifying the parliamentary process has led young women to form an interest in politics, and we have had young women who participated on our programme who have went on to become councillors or stand in local elections. But then again, as we were saying, it takes a kind of cross-community collaboration in order to do that.
Okay. Thanks. If I can just pick up on a couple of other things that are kind of in this conversation. Talat, you mentioned that there can be a risk to political parties of being transparent about, you know, their data, or the processes that they have to achieve or to move towards equal representation or inclusive representation. Given that, and given some of those challenges, what should political parties be doing? Thinking of 2026 and the Holyrood elections, and then 27, the local government elections. What are the kinds of things that you want political parties specifically to be focused on?
Well, I think political parties are likely doing their candidate selections currently. So I think political parties need to be thinking about, in my view, we can talk about women who are running as candidates. The question is who is put in a winnable seat. There is a question about, there's still a very clear preference for spaces that are more likely to be winnable, although of course this is all dependent on voting on the day, but what polling tells us is winnable, more likely to go to what is referred to as favoured sons within political parties. So there needs to be some pretty significant work done, not just to have 50% women candidates come forward, but where are those women? Where are they positioned? And are they positioned in places that will mean they become elected representatives? Legislated candidate quotas only does half of that job. It doesn't do the other half, because that's for political parties to get to. It is an indication of a culture when the winnable seats are not in the hands of women. So I think there's something to be done, and for parties to reflect on that particularly. More widely, and this links to the point that was made previously about what is the longer term strategy, that is both outreach, support during election and support to succeed after election. Now is the time for parties to be working with the toolkit that exists at Engender, and actually engaging in and thinking about their processes beyond selection. So what is the strategy to enable women to succeed, and what resources is put into that? And the final thing I'll say is, most, if not all, political parties have some kind of equalities groups. They have women's groups within their political parties. They might have BAME groups within political parties. They are so far on the periphery of the work of political parties. So there's a big question about what authority are they given, what resources are they given, what importance are they given within political parties. It's not just an annual conference where women get to talk to each other. It's a conference that influences the work of the party and beyond. So there's a few things that I think parties can be doing right now, but resourcing the women that are within them and the infrastructure that you give them is one key aspect of that.
Rebecca, come to you with a similar question.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, everything that Tal said, absolutely. We would also say it's important for parties to champion diverse forms of leadership. I think one thing that came from the programme is that young women believe that in order to be a successful politician, you have to be a particular sort of, hardline, perhaps hard-shelled person, and that's not always the case. So we would say it's really important for parties to encourage, more effective forms of leadership and feminist leadership in particular. And also, I suppose, also figuring out who's missing as well is really important than just including women into the mix. We believe it's really important to meet young women where they're at within their communities, identify opportunities for women to engage and grow within the parties. One thing that came from the programme is young women are really interested to engage in Parliament, but they do feel that it's not accessible for them at the moment. So providing like easy read reports, easy read versions of reports that come out in order, so they can understand what's happening and what's being said. Also just encouraging the use of like BSL as a standard across the Parliament, and just meeting with young women in their communities or online to discuss issues that matter to them was one thing that was really important for that came out of that programme.
Thanks, Rebecca. And Kat, what should the focus of political parties be between now and 27?
Yeah, obviously I would agree with both what Tala and Rebecca have said. And, again, just to say that we do have a really comprehensive toolkit there. But what to pick out a couple of things, what I would say is actually having parties need to make sure that they're approaching this with a level of transparency, because I think that there's a perception that I don't think is unwarranted, that a lot of the information about how you stand as a candidate, how you get selected, etc., a lot of that is kind of steeped in being a party insider, being in the know, and it's not particularly accessible to people who are not necessarily as steeped in internal party politics and operations. So even just the basics of having accessible information that is easy to understand, that you don't need to be within a certain kind of clique necessarily to be able to access. Then I think in terms of the recruitment processes, in terms of any kind of recruitment processes, the same things stand up. Like who is doing the selection in terms of panels? Do you have a diversity on those panels? Do you have a competency and a skill set? Are you asking consistent questions? The research that we've been doing at the moment, one of the things that's already come through is women telling us about, really highly sexist questions that they're being asked in terms of recruitment panels around childcare, around not asked from a point of view of support and help, but problematising their reality as potential caregivers, for example. So I think just the really strong diversity and inclusion practices that you would expect from any employer, parties should be adopting them. And then I think just, Talat's point about investing in networks and actually giving them teeth, I think is really important. And then also I think to the extent that it's possible, trying to look at those financial barriers that women and marginalised groups face and looking if the parties can do anything to lessen them and provide any support with them, because they can be major barriers to people coming forward. But I think, just making sure that the processes are fair and transparent and accountable is a really basic thing that parties can do, but it's unfortunately not done enough.
Thanks. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. We have a brief supplementary from Evelyn Tweed, please.
Thanks, Convener. What would you say to parties that have included gender inclusion measures maybe last time and they've got 50% or more in Parliament just now, but no decision has been taken about 2026? Because my worry is that if we don't consider those sort of measures again, that we go backwards and we fall below the 50% again. What would you say to those parties? Talat?
I would say that it's naive to think that you've done something once and therefore you've changed an entire culture or society and how it views the political culture and space for women. I think whether it is all women shortlists, whether it is 50% candidates, whether it's zipping of lists, whether it's twinning, There are, I mean, I can go into what those different things mean, but I'm assuming that's probably known. There are multiple methods, and it would be short-sighted to not pursue those methods when they have been tried, tested and proven over decades. There's evidence that shows us that they make a difference. And one of the things that I think is important to say, and one of the questions I get asked often is, but it's got to be about merit. And I think it's important that I very clearly tackle that. Meritocracy is a myth if 51% of the population is not represented in Parliament. We do not operate on meritocracy, we operate on favour currently. So actually what has been illustrated when you pursue those methods, whether it's quotas, whether it's twinning, whether it's zipping, when you take the effort to ensure that there is access for women, you are inviting in merit that probably should have already been there. And as a consequence, the capacity and competency of parliamentarians actually has been evidenced to improve when those kinds of measures have been put in place. So it is an imperative, not just on parties for the sake of having representative candidacy, but for the quality that exists within our Parliament and in our councils to take those measures seriously and pursue them, because one-off measures in 1 year, as has been proven from the dip in the number of women that existed in the second and third elections after the devolution in 1999 of Parliament, we actually had a reduction in the number of women who were elected. It is not linear. Those processes need to be in place for as long as societal inequality is in place.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. We also have another supplementary from Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you very much for giving all your opening statements. Really, really important information. Talit, can I go back to the merit base? Because I certainly know, as one of the first women of colour and first Sikh and first Indian women coming into the Scottish Parliament, I would never want to have been selected just because I am a woman of colour. I would love to have been selected, and I hope I was selected, and I think I was selected for the fact that I deserved it. I had that experience, I had that talent, and it was merit-based. So I would think, I've spoken to many people because I train a lot of BAME women, that it's about merit. To me, it's more about the fact that opportunity should be there, right? Policy should be there, strategy should be there with parties, but one should never think that you should be number one on a list or number two on a list because you're of colour or because you're a woman. So I just wanted you to give me a little bit more information on that, because that's my personal views and experience, but also the views of the BAME women, which I work with a lot as well.
Absolutely. I don't think any woman or anybody from a marginalised community wants to be patronised into any position. Taking those kinds of measures is trying to undo historic institutionalised inequality. It is creating a level playing field for people to be able to play to their competency rather than to be a foot behind as a consequence of institutionalised inequality. Now, I see many people from marginalised backgrounds say that they want to get there based on competency. What we are doing when we take those measures is tackling the incompetency that prevented you from having access in the first place. That's the purpose of those measures. So when we are having those conversations, actually to dismiss them is often exactly that rhetoric is used, that, well, we want you to get there on merit, so we don't want to patronise you by putting those measures in place. But actually, isn't it more patronising to leave the status quo intact, assuming that those who are marginalised will find their way to the same space when they have not been given the access of opportunity that exists? It is not a level playing field. These measures are creating a level playing field for everyone to play to their strengths rather than at the back of the line. That's all these processes are. And you've also got to remember that when these processes come in place, that gets you through the door. But the selection process and the procedures are the same. Campaigning, door knocking, trying to get people to vote for you is the same. Being in Parliament, giving speeches, having a bill taken forward, you're in the same place as everybody else. Your competency needs to lead you there. All that's happening is the door is being left ajar in the same way it is for everybody else.
No, thank you for clarifying that. I believe in access of opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to questions from Tess, please.
Thank you. So, Talit, you talked about the positive action measures that some political parties are taking to increase the representation of women MSPs. In your opinion, are some measures more successful than others?
So across the board, the success of any measure depends on two things: how soon in the process they are applied. In fact, I won't say two things because I'm probably about to say five, so I apologise. One is how early in the process they are put in place. If they are put in place with the occasional by-election, if they're put in place close to an election happening, actually they are often reductive and they don't work. The second is how much work is happening to challenge attitudes within political parties towards those particular measures, because otherwise it is women and those from marginalised groups who get in on those measures that then have to take on the discrimination of people assuming they have been given favour. So what kind of attitudinal change has happened and push has happened to tackle that kind of negative attitude and do a genuine evidence-based communication about what those measures are within political parties. And then the final thing is in investment and consistency of those measures across the board. There are a range of different measures. What we have seen as being the most impactful has often been all-women shortlists, which has ensured that it is a range of competent women that are put into a particular seat or a position that can be chosen from. But actually, there's not enough evidence to tell us which of those measures is making the biggest impact, because we don't see consistent use of those measures across political parties and across, even within a political party, across elections. So that's data that we should probably invest in, and I think Women 50/50 could probably do some work around assessing that. But what we see at the moment is all of them have their space and position, particularly with proportional representation and the difference between lists and constituencies. But what is missing is its consistent use and tackling negative attitudes towards those processes inside parties.
So all women shortlists and looking at winnable seats?
Yes, has been the most promising so far, but there is not enough evidence to tell us what zipping lists and twinning has achieved, because that actually isn't consistently used across political parties.
Thank you. And going back to Kat, because Kat, you talked about legislation change. Is that something that you would see is essential, or is there anything else that you see would be more impactful to achieve change?
I mean, I think within the Equality Act, there's scope for positive measures. So I think that the law obviously allows for these things. I think that there could be a tightening up of the law to kind of clarify certain areas. But we would very much support the continuation of positive measures, whether that's twinning, whether that is all women shortlist zipping, and to just to kind of reiterate Talat's point as well, I think there's some evidence that it might vary based on what electoral systems, whether it's first past the post, etc., proportional representation. So it's hard to say one is more definitive than the other. But generally, these suite of options is something that we would very much advocate for the retention of for the foreseeable future. I think, we only need to look at the non-linear way progress has occurred within the Scottish Parliament in terms of representation of women to see that when we take the foot off the gas, women's representation decreases. It has not been consistent throughout the existence of the Scottish Parliament. It's been, it's went back and forth. So we know that we do need a firm, clear foundation and clarity within the law about what parties should be doing. And we would very much advocate for retention of these measures for the foreseeable future. Ultimately, none of us, we want to live in a society where women and marginalised groups are given every bit as much of a fair hearing, but we don't think at the moment that's a reality, that actually the systems that have built up over hundreds of years have not been fully redesigned yet to work for women and marginalised groups. So until that has fully happened, we're going to need these kind of positive measures such as quotas and twinning and all women shortlists. We're going to continue to need them. And the law as it currently stands allowed for that. It may be that we need to improve the laws slightly, but we think that the law is strong at the moment in terms of allowing for these positive measures.
Thank you. And Rebecca, because looking at the pipeline, and we've touched upon women primarily being the carers, and so it's almost as though they're time poor, but they have to do campaigning. They haven't got the financial resources, and then when they do get in to be an MSP, there isn't the childcare support. You take, for example, here, it's just a few hours a day, and there's late sitting. So what would you say to both political parties and to the Scottish Parliament that we need to do things differently, political parties do things differently to attract and retain?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as part of our evaluation of the Young Women Lead programme, we did speak to women who've went into politics in various forms, whether it's joining political parties as staff, as councillors, or going on to stand as MSPs. And they've told us that what would have really helped them in the early stages of their political career is like a kind of mentorship scheme that would have been set up to perhaps talk to other women who are already kind of on their journey in politics. But obviously we would caveat that we don't think it should overburden women or other minority groups. It's always kind of women taking up these positions in order to talk to other women. The alumni of the Young Women Lead programme also told us that connections that women make with each other are really important in fostering leadership throughout their careers. And they emphasise that giving young women and girls a space to get to know each other and discuss things that are important to them safely and sensitively is really important. Apart from the obvious things like childcare and other, financial concerns, young women who have sought to enter into politics really think the parties could be improving safeguarding mechanisms for them on public platforms from hate speech, from misogynistic harassment, and improve accountability mechanisms when reporting a complaint within the party. And I think that's been one thing that's come through from us. Women who are perhaps experiencing something from another party member or within their constituency, complaints haven't been followed through. There's been no transparency. They don't know who's investigating the complaint, who's on the board. So for us, a lot of young women just become disenfranchised and just want to leave and not be in that space again. So it's ensuring that parties are really clear on where complaints are going, who's involved in them, and that it's taken really seriously, as it should be.
Okay, thank you. So having harassment, bullying, internal procedures, and you talk about trust. Yeah. For trust to be there, that people have to know that they'll follow through. Just my final question is around, and this is fairly topical, and we're looking at the next 2026 election. So this week we've seen reports, and recently as well, of sitting female politicians in good seats, potentially facing deselection ahead of the elections, and almost seen as they're paving the way for male candidates. And there's this sense of entitlement. How would you, or maybe just because of short of time, but does the panel have any suggestion on how this is approached when personal male or party interest is more important and prioritised ahead of widening representation? So, Rebecca, you're nodding your head there. What would you say about that?
Yeah, well, I would just return back to the point of transparency. Like, I think it's very difficult for us to say, it's solely based on gender why someone has gone into that position. So I think for us, like what came from the programme, young women just feel as if there's a total lack of transparency in who's being selected, who's being promoted through the party lines, and there needs to be more accountability mechanisms in place for people to understand, the reasons why a woman would be deselected and a man to be put in their position.
Thank you. Talat?
Well, I think, again, agreeing with Rebecca, this actually comes down to having a commitment to women's representation, full stop. So it's about the culture that's enabled within the party, because it's very rarely just about one candidate versus another. It's about the entire culture and the enabling of something. So really, particularly when it comes to spaces where we're using mechanisms, for example, to ensure that women are represented, that's what I mean by consistency. It can't be removed because of political whim or convenience, or when polling shows us that something is winnable and something is not. It actually needs to be committed to as part of the foundations, the principles of a political party, all political parties, rather than changed on political whim or will.
Thank you. And I think in terms of time, I'll pass back to the convener.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, convener. My question is around basically you've spoke about collecting data, spoke about all the great research you're doing, and thank you very much for doing that research as well. It's so important. my question is around what benefits do you think collecting data is on diversity of the candidates for the actual political parties? And I know you've touched on some of this, but it'd be good if we could hear a little bit more on, so that political parties are listening hopefully today, and that they can hear what benefits there are in that. Kat, do you want to start off? I think you had mentioned some of the stuff you were collecting.
Sure. I mean, I think just at the most basic level, I think the fact that we don't collect data of candidates, who's been selected, who hasn't been selected, the diverse, we don't collect that kind of diversity or intersectional data critically, I think is I mean, there's little excuse for it at this stage, I would say, and I think actually as well we see that it's worse in local elections. So when there's bigger numbers, the data collection is worse. So from our point of view, it's very hard for us to track the changes that are occurring, understand fully the issues that might be occurring in terms of who's been selected, who's not been selected, and the reasons why. And also, it's a critical element of accountability for change. If we don't know who is being lost at that selection stage for candidature, if we don't have the oversight of that, it's very, very hard to hold to account the parties or the broader culture, and to really understand how to make the changes. So I think data is absolutely critical, and it's hard to fully understand why it's not being collected as standard. I mean, there's legal mechanisms that we would argue need to be enacted by the UK government that sit within the Equality Act, that would mandate this legally, and we support that. So Section 106 of the Equality Act, we've called for that to be mandated. But in the absence of that, we really think that parties should be collecting this as standard for all of their elections, whether that's MPs, MSPs or local councillors.
I agree with Kat. We've been calling for this for quite some time about Section 106 being enacted. It's there and it's not being utilised. Without that mandate, political parties are unlikely to do it, because actually if they were to publish the data, it wouldn't be a particularly good news story. That's the reality of why it's not published. But it not being a good news story is what creates the reputational expectation and need to try harder and put in some of the strategies that we've all been discussing and questioned about today. Throughout the existence of Women 50/50, one of the key things that we are often asked for and approached in the run-up to an election is, do you have the numbers? And we do that, and we do that on a voluntary basis. We only do that dependent on the information that is publicly available of the candidates. So we will tally up the number of women candidates, the number of women of colour candidates, the disabled women candidates, but we can only do that on the basis of what they have publicly declared or what is publicly available. Collecting demographic diversity data is really important to have an accurate picture of who is involved in politics, who is being given access to have to be selected and then potentially elected in politics. It is incredibly useful as an accountability tool, and it is normalised in so many other public institutions and other spaces that we're at the point of it being somewhat ridiculous that we don't have it as standard within political practice. It is required, and if it will not be made mandatory, it should be considered a reputational need by political parties. But at the moment, the emphasis should be on the enacting of 106. Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's so important for parties to understand where they're currently standing and what needs to change. And we would just add that it would be really important to also collect data on women who perhaps want to stand or seek interest in it but don't actually get to that stage. So it's really important to see where women are dropping off, and if there's more engagement that could be done to perhaps raise their interest further down the line.
Thank you. I've got one more supplementary, convener. Thank you for those responses. Dr. Rebecca, you spoke about leadership, and I wanted to touch on a little bit about role models. So we all know that, I know growing up, when you look at somebody on the television or you see them in the street, you see them in certain positions, that's what makes you think. And then certainly, like I said, it's happened with me, that I want to be there. Why can't I be there? And then you have that kind of ambition to be there. So I certainly know from the Conservative Party, my own party, we've had 3 female Prime Ministers, we've had 4 female leaders, including a BAME leader as well, and 2 Scottish leaders. So what can you say that councillors, MSPs, MPs and parties, what can they do more as role models to attract more people to say that, you know, you can be that MP, you can be that MSP, you can be that councillor?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, it would be, you know, young women have told us that they just want politicians to meet them where they're at. It's demystifying the process of politics. It's all very well and great to see people on TV, as you say, and you know, people talking about being in politics, but if you don't even understand how that space works, you don't see yourself in that space, then it's very difficult to kind of instill that sort of change. Young women told us that they found it really helpful to come into the parliamentary space and to speak to politicians and to, you know, to see themselves and also an elected representative. So one thing that's also came through the programme is that young women feel as if, even though, as you say, there's a lot of women in politics at the moment, they still feel like the Parliament is a male-led system. And it goes back to culture, that we need to be doing more to change the culture of politics in order for women to actually see themselves represented in their elected representatives.
Thank you, Dr. Tillett.
Sure, I can come in. I think role modelling is really important. However, one of the things that I will emphasise is similar to making sure that there's gender parity within committees. If there's not enough women to do that, then the burden of representation is on such few shoulders. So, for example, there are 2 women of colour in Parliament, and they can be positioned as role models, but how many people can they be role models for if there aren't enough of them in Parliament in the first place? So, whilst role modelling is a method of encouraging others from marginalised backgrounds to come in, actually you need more representation to enable that role modelling in the first place. And in terms of what political parties can do, actually one of the things that really needs to be considered is who do political parties put forward for key speeches, for media appearances, who's given a platform as well once they are actually elected. I am founder of an organisation called Pass the Mic, which launched in 2019, that does research, again, particularly on underrepresentation and misrepresentation of women of colour in media and commentary and beyond in Scotland. We did an analysis in 2021 election of media with the University of Strathclyde, 4 weeks of media analysis, over 3,000 Scottish news stories. 26.5% of those interviewed and commentating were women. Across the board, 1% were women of colour, and women of colour were more likely to be photographed and included in images than to be heard from for their opinions. That's the landscape we exist in. So if there's something political parties can do, it's also what platform do they give to the women who are already within the parties to be in media, to be the speaker, to be the role model.
Just on that, Talit, can I ask? Obviously, you're right, you have to have a platform. I'm very lucky. I'm going to be an ask her to stand this tonight, and then I'm with you next week as well on an interview. So I'm very fortunate that you're right. There's only 2 of us. We can't be everywhere, but we're quite fortunate we're on certain platforms that we can have that voice. But do you think it not goes back to again leadership roles as well? Because I'm the deputy chair of the Scottish Conservative Party, so I know when I'm going to speak, I'm going to speak for all those women of colour. That's what I'm doing today for that minority group. But I'm also going to speak for all those women as well, but all those people on a more merit-based system. So could I ask the question again, just on that how important is leadership when it comes to these roles?
I think leadership is certainly important, but if we're looking at a hierarchical infrastructure, there's only a certain number of spaces in leadership, and leadership can mean different things. Whilst, yes, there's leader and deputy leader, there's also the leadership of role modelling. So it's where the platform is afforded, full stop. So it's different types of leadership. It's the visibility of that type of leadership that matters, and political parties can absolutely do more to enable that.
No, thank you, Talit. Kat, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just very quickly, I'll add. I mean, I think the international research I mentioned earlier does indicate that role models play an enormous part in encouraging women to think and see themselves, as you said, Pam, see themselves in parliamentary spaces. But I think where that falls down is where when kind of aspiration meets reality and women go into these cultures in these spaces and they're not supported, I think that can be very difficult. So I think, just to build on Talat's point a bit, I think that men in parliamentary spaces play a big role in terms of helping manage and moderate that culture and ensuring that the culture is not one that is sexist, patronising, hostile towards women, and that men pick up the mantle and help address these issues internally within these spaces. So I think that seeing diverse women in leadership positions and elected to Parliament is hugely important from a role model point of view. But I think men can be role models in a different way as well, and can be, most importantly, allies in this. So I would really stress that. And then just one very quick thing, the other thing that hasn't necessarily come up, but the evidence indicates that more women elected into spaces in Parliament leads to the prioritisation or greater attention given to issues that are important to women. And I think you can see that in Scotland. So you can see that in a lot of private members' bills that have been brought forward in terms of the period poverty, breastfeeding, the safe access zones. That's also sends a message to young women that Parliament cares about the issues that they do, or to all women that Parliament cares about the issues that they do. So that's relevant to role modelling in terms of really kind of communicating issues that have historically been under prioritised in parliamentary spaces.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to questions from Paul O'Kane, who's joining us online.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the panel. I suppose I'm keen to maybe follow up on some of the discussion we were having earlier about perhaps international examples or indeed examples elsewhere in the UK. Ireland is currently having a general election at the moment, and I appreciate it's slightly different context given that they have state funding of their political parties, but this will be the first election in Ireland where 40% of candidates have to be female or parties won't receive their state funding. So keen to maybe get a context of, obviously we do have some mechanisms of state funding in the UK, short money and things like that, if people given consideration to how that might be a device essentially to look at ensuring that quotas essentially are put in place. Sorry, I'm doing that thing where, because I'm not online, Talat, do you want to come in first? Because I saw you.
I can do, thank you. I think that there's, we've discussed already the financial implications of running a campaign and participating in politics. We do have, the Scottish Government did launch the Access to Elected Office Fund, which was specifically for disabled candidates, and it's important that those types of initiatives continue. Those can also be broadened out, and that should be considered in terms of access for caring responsibilities and caring support, childcare, wider considerations that would enable women to participate fully, and marginalised women in particular to participate fully. That might include things like translation services, for example. So there is a space where should be made consideration for some state funding that would enable those from marginalised backgrounds to be candidates, regardless of the political party they're standing for. We have an example of that through the Access to Elected Office Fund, but the continuation of that, the investment in that, and that being widened out to marginalised communities and what individuals who are running might need, is something that should be put into consideration by the Scottish Government.
Thanks, Talat. But just as well, do you think that there is a way to say, so short money at Westminster, which is payable to parties with certain representation, there's obviously leaders' allowances and things in the Scottish Parliament, do you think it would be something that we should explore to say actually that money should be dependent upon your action in this area, as they have done in Ireland?
Yeah, I think there is absolutely scope to look into that. As somebody who pursues legislative candidate quotas, what we tend to see is voluntary mechanisms will get us to around, evidence suggests 35% women, and people think that is 50%, and they've created an equilibrium. But actually, voluntary mechanisms have proven that they will not get us to 50%. So there needs to be other interventions. whilst we have voluntary toolkits and engagement activities, that is all dependent on the political will, engagement, enthusiasm in individuals. There needs to be, in my view, less carrot, more stick, and I believe that this would be one of the ways in which to do that. I think it should be considered in Scotland too.
Thank you, Talat, and you've very helpfully lined up where I wanted to explore next, which was the voluntary nature of guidance. And Wales, we know, is going to issue voluntary guidance ahead of 2026. I mean, I presume the view might be that at a minimum, of course, the Scottish Government should do that. But from what Talat said there, I think there are other and more things that need to absolutely be done. So I don't know if anyone else wants to reflect on those 2 points, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, just to agree, I think that yeah, I mean, the voluntary aspect of it, obviously, voluntary is as a minimum what we would expect, and it's certainly better than nothing. But it's not taking us as far and as quickly as we need it to, and I think that the assumption that what we've got at the moment is enough is an interesting one, because the outcomes are not are not demonstrating that in terms of the numbers that we're seeing returned in different electoral spaces, or the non-linear progress that we're making, the kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back approach. So I think the assumption that everything as is at the moment is just great and that will get us there is a false assumption. We do need to do more, and I think that looking at more legislative parts to that, and on the funding issue in particular, I think we know that there are major financial barriers, and that the financial barriers are not equal across the board, that the most marginalised face the highest ones. So I think that we absolutely do need to look at whatever we can do. And then finally, just to say that it's about investment in the health of our democracy, and it's about investment in the quality of the outcomes of our parliamentary spaces. And I think that it's a very, very good use of money to ensure that the policy that we're passing has the most impact, and ultimately the whole of society will benefit from that. So I think that it's not about favouring certain groups, it's about creating that equal playing field and actually improving the outcomes for everyone.
And I suppose trying to pull a lot of what we've talked about this morning together, I mean, I suppose my question would be if you could pick one piece of advice at the moment to give to political parties, what would that be? I mean, I appreciate we've gone through quite a lot this morning, but, you know, political parties can be agents of change, and there is obviously different varying levels of examples of that. But if you kind of had to say one thing, you know, what would that be at the moment?
Come in, although that's very difficult. I have about you know, a book worth of potential things that they should do. But if I was to think about it, it really does come down to creating accountability in cultures. So one of the things that are most difficult to change is the persistence of discrimination, sexism, inequality within political cultures and what is enabled. There needs to be an audit done of cultures within political parties, and for there to be independent scrutiny created and reporting mechanisms created that can be trusted. Because if there is a safe place to report, then you know what the issues are, and if there is independent scrutiny, then perpetrators of those problems are less likely to perpetrate those problems, because they see that there's going to be real consequence. So my piece of advice would be genuine auditing of cultures, independent scrutiny and reporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Talat. Do you know if Rebecca or Kat want to offer a reflection?
I can come in, Rebecca, if you want. Yeah, so I would say the first one would be move quickly, because I think if parties haven't done the groundwork for the 2026 and 2027 local elections and the parliamentary elections next year, there needs to be a concerted effort to move quite quickly now. All of the work that needs, there's a comprehensive guide, they're available. There's you know, all of the different organisations have done the work to tell parties exactly what we think they should be doing. There's comprehensive breakdown of the different steps available through the toolkit and other documents, the theory of change that's available, and we can certainly send that. And then the final thing as part of that is I would say be bold. I think you know, I think there's this, we get the feeling, whether it's justified or not, that there's a slight kind of swithering at the moment among some political parties about whether they should keep their foot on the gas or whether they've done enough. And we would say that absolutely you have not done enough. And some of the parties have been really progressive in the past, and we want them to keep that up because the job is not completed. So I would say be bold and move quickly.
Thank you very much.
Just to add that's already been said. Just show women that their voice and their experiences do matter, and that it matters more than on International Women's Day once a year or during 16 days of action. I think sometimes young women feel as if parties are only focusing on issues that affect women at, you know, during specific points of the year or in the lead up to the election. So just show that you're committed to listening and including them.
Thank you. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much. I would just like to make sure that the members are content that they've asked all the questions they would like to ask. Yeah, and I'd like to ask the panel, is there anything else you would like to add before we bring this panel to a conclusion? Nothing at all. Okay, we will suspend briefly while we have a changeover of witnesses. Thank you. Welcome back. We now move to our second panel, and I welcome to the meeting James Tweedy, Director of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, Anne McGuinness, co-convener of the Women's Network Scottish Green Party, Sarah Boyack, MSP, attending on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party, and Caelan Mahanan, Local Government Officer for the Scottish National Party. Thank you and welcome this morning. Apologies, Maggie.
Sorry, Convener, just to put on the record so colleagues know, just for full disclosure, Anne McGuinness is a member of my parliamentary staff team. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. We've got that on the record. We'll now move on to asking our witnesses if they would like to begin with an opening statement, and I'll come to James Tweedy first, please.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks for the invitation to come today. The Scottish Conservative Party, as an organisation, are keen to utilise the full range of talent in our party and ensure we have as diverse a range of candidates and elected representatives as possible. In the last few years, this has seen an increasing number of women elected to the Scottish Parliament from our party, and it's something we want to ensure continues as we promote and encourage female candidates. The party, the Candidates Board, are affiliated organisations such as Women to Win and Conservative Women's Organisation Scotland, all aim to grow the number of female candidates and elected representatives that we have through a number of measures such as active recruitment, bespoke support and training, one-to-one mentoring and strategic advice. While at present 29% of our MSPs are female, at the last election the number of newly elected MSPs, the percentage of newly elected MSPs of the party was 50%, which demonstrates the progress that can be made and that we want to continue to do. And at that election we also elected the first, for example, first woman of colour and first Indian woman to the Scottish Parliament. I'm really pleased to be able in my work to work with our partner organisations such as Women to Win, Conservative Women's Organisation Scotland, Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME, Scottish Young Conservatives and the Scottish Conservative Disability Group to make sure we're doing everything we can in this field. But there is still work to do, and we are keen to do that to ensure that we have as diverse a range of candidates and elected representatives as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, please.
Good morning, everyone. As Maggie said, I'm a caseworker in Maggie's office, but today I'm here as the co-convener of the Scottish Greens Women's Network. So the Women's Network and the Scottish Greens works to promote gender parity at all levels within the party. We provide a network of support to empower women to take on roles within the party and within wider political spheres, as well as elected roles. And then we move on to provide peer-to-peer support when women achieve their political goals as well. Like Talit said earlier, we are volunteer run, and we tend to be run by those that experience the inequalities the most. We've conducted research within the Scottish Greens to identify barriers to politics, and through that we found that the women tend to face substantial structural and social barriers at the very earliest stages of their involvement in politics. Another thing that we work a lot on in the Women's Network is survivorship bias. We're very aware that we're not speaking to the women that haven't made it as very far, the women that have given up on their very first branch meeting and such things. So we recognise that there's measurements that organisations can take to help break down some of those barriers, particularly the ones faced by women from different socio-economic backgrounds, so people with caring responsibilities and disabilities. We believe that all women deserve to have the same access to opportunity that has historically benefited men. I think that Scottish Parliament has quite a lot of work to do within its own walls. It was highlighted earlier as well, such as the gender balancing within committees and a practical creche facility for women to use. Just as a couple of examples, the Parliament has the resources and the influence to lead by example in these issues, and it would be really great to see that happen. The gender sensitive audit is a good tool for driving that change and leading by example if the recommendations are fully enacted. However, it will take a concerted effort across multiple sectors to redress the inequality of access and inequality of opportunity in politics. and wider decision making that has been to the benefit of men and the detriment of women for millennia. I think that the work that the Scottish Greens are undertaking has had good outcomes, but we still have quite a long way to go, and I look forward to being part of the discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here to represent my party, Scottish Labour, as one of those that was involved in the 50-50 campaign before the Parliament was established. It was our ambition that the Parliament would represent the entire country and that women needed to be at the heart of that. So since our first elections in '99, we have had twinning. And the aim of that is to ensure that women get equal chances to get elected, both on the constituencies and on the list. So we twin the seats for the constituencies, 2 seats are twinned together, and then we have the list seats. And that has not given us 50% at every election, but it's taken us close to 50%. And it's something of pride, actually, to look at how the numbers of women elected across the parties has increased. But there are loads of issues we need to be thinking about now. The barriers that have been mentioned already, the economic disadvantage that women face in terms of campaigning, in terms of what employment you have, how keen are your employers to let you be an elected candidate, the social attitudes that are still there, the expectations that are lower of women, and also the discrimination that women face, particularly in issues like social media, which I would say has changed dramatically over the last couple of decades. And then an issue that's been mentioned before is childcare. It is an issue for us, and I think it's something we need to really look at strongly in terms of retention of women, so that women have the chance not just to stand, not just to have their voices heard and be elected, but actually to be able to stand again. In terms of our party, we do a lot of work on mentoring and shadowing of MSPs, so that women get the chance to see what it's like as an MSP, to see how they could contribute themselves. And the mentoring groups, we do a lot of work with the Joe Cox Foundation and also the Fabians, and that enables women to come into Parliament. They do not all go and stand as MSPs, but a lot of them, it helps them in their business work, the third sector that they might be involved in, and I think it gives them confidence and an understanding of the Parliament. I think for us, in terms of our internal party structures, we've got a women's committee that's competitive to get involved in it. And that involves women from our local constituencies and our trade unions and our affiliated organisations. We have an annual conference that's useful for networking, giving women advice and giving them a platform, giving them the experience. Our Scottish Policy Forum at the moment is chaired and the vice chair are both women, and all our constituency delegates happen to be female. That was not a requirement. That's just the competition at the moment. And I think liaising with our trade union colleagues to give women that chance so that they have the aspiration and also the support to enable them to be candidates. So at the moment we are 45% of our members in the Scottish Parliament are female. We've got equality in our shadow cabinet, but I think I go back to the point that it's not a once you've done it, it's fixed. We need to be thinking about this all the time. So very much welcome the fact that the committee is having this inquiry and keen to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Caelan, please.
Thank you so much for having me here today. The SNP is solid in our belief that gender equality is crucial for our democracy, and this is something that is embedded within our party constitution. That's why it's been SNP governments that have had the first ever gender balanced and female majority cabinets. Over half of our MSP cohort are women at 53%, and almost 60% of our government is made up of women as well. This is something, as I mentioned, that needs to be embedded within constitutions and the cultures, crucially, within all of our parties. It's only by identifying and prioritising gender equality in the kind of mid-2000s as a tangible goal when it came to representation in our parliament that we were able to plan ahead. And this was anticipated it would take us 3 election cycles to achieve parity at the Scottish Parliament, but this has come to fruition after only 2 election cycles with our hard gender balance mechanisms that have been in place in the last 2 Scottish Parliament elections. But while we've made progress, there's still a lot of work to be done, both within our party and across all parties, to ensure that our Parliament truly reflects the diversity of Scotland. While we've seen increased representation of women, with more women serving as MSPs across political parties, I'm very conscious that supporting women into politics doesn't begin and end with candidate assessment and with election cycles. As has been mentioned, with leadership roles within committees, within party leadership, are still dominated by men. And this is something we must strive to get over, in terms of gender balance, to ensure that women have equal opportunities to shape decision-making and policy once they're elected. So I look forward to the opportunity to discuss with you all the important work that we're doing in the SNP and have done to prioritise gender equality within our internal processes, and indeed the scope for work still to be done.
Thank you all. We will now move on to questions from the committee, and I'm going to start us off. On the first panel, I asked the stakeholders why it was important to have equality with men and women in the Scottish Parliament. So I'd like to ask you, how important is that to your party that we have that equality? And I'll come to you first, James.
I certainly would say it's very important to our party. It is something we want to make sure that we have at all levels, not just at the Scottish Parliament, but throughout Council and UK Parliament as well. I think there's a lot of evidence around this that shows that you get certainly better decision makings from wider and more diverse groups, but also that where you have a more representative party and Parliament, that will be more inclusive, that will be more encouraging of other candidates coming forward, and more able to represent the overall population, and make sure that people feel that there is someone that they can effectively see and that they can come forward to. So I think it's very important, in short, to our party, and we would want to do everything we can to promote it further.
Thank you. Anne, please.
So yeah, in the Scottish Greens, we think that gender balancing is really important at all levels and is discussed frequently. We have gender balancing of co-conveners of all of our internal committees that run our party. We have gender balancing at branch level, and then we put that through into gender balancing of candidates when we put forward for election as well. So I'd say we're a feminist party, and we really work really hard at all levels to promote gender balancing.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Yeah, in terms of Scottish Labour, we have gender balancing at our local campaign level, in terms of our constituency level, in terms of the executive membership. We've, as I say, from day one, we've had the approach in terms of our selection of candidates to enable women to be elected both in the constituency and the list, and have a 50-50 approach there. I think for us it's really important in terms of policy to have women at the top table, in terms of leaders that we've had over the years, deputy leaders, and just in terms of thinking about the policy issues. One of the things we've worked hard on is women leading on policy issues, but getting our male colleagues to support them. That's absolutely critical as well, so that men also take responsibility. And I think the points I made about our having our women's conference, making sure that we get female delegates to our conferences, it's about right throughout the whole structures, and encouraging that from our student representatives as well, so that every part of the way you could get involved in our party, we make sure that women are centre to that, amongst other equalities as well, obviously. Thanks.
Thank you. Caelan, please.
This is something that's extremely important to myself and the SNP, and something that we've prioritised continuously, as I've mentioned, over the last couple of election cycles. And we are having to navigate new ways to continue to prioritise this, as we're precluded from hard gender balance mechanisms and constituency seats for the next election. So this has meant that we're focusing more on the kind of wraparound support that women get when it comes to coming forward for selection. So while this can still look like gender balance mechanisms when it comes to regional lists, we are also focusing on providing training and resources to develop political skills, and engaging with our national office bearer, and particularly our national women's convener, by hosting a series of events specifically around candidate assessment out with election cycles, to make sure that this is a continuous process throughout every year. Supportive policies is something that we prioritise within the SNP as well, both in practice and in terms of policy making. In terms of work-life balance and party policies that are flexible for working hours and childcare, so we facilitate creches at our party conference and for our candidate assessment training days, so that this is accessible to all parents as well. And similar to other parties when it comes to engaging with our affiliate organisations and with our national executive committees. Our National Executive Committee regional representatives are gender balanced, whereby we have one all-female shortlist and we have one open list. So women have the option to obviously stand on both of these lists, and the regional representatives make up a large bulk of our National Executive Committee. So this helps to ensure that there's a minimum of gender balance there. But our affiliates especially work particularly hard on when it comes to gender balance, from our youth wing to our student wing, our LGBT wing, our disability wing, and our BAME wing as well, all work quite closely together in facilitating events and kind of social networking aspects as well, to ensure that this culture is created whereby women feel confident enough to step forward.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Tess White, please.
Thank you, Convener. So my question, if I start off with Caelan first, please. How, Caelan, does your party reach out to potential candidates to increase diversity? And at what point during the electoral cycle does that happen? Thank you.
So, as I've mentioned, equal representation and reflecting Scotland's diversity is something that's embedded in our constitution and in our party rules. So this means that the message is continually repeated, that we want to encourage people from underrepresented groups to come forward within our candidate assessment process, and this applies to Westminster and local government as well. So those who may initially be encouraged to apply for one of these cycles may then end up standing in our Scottish Parliament cycle as well. As I mentioned, our different affiliates hosted different events that are aimed at the groups that they represent. These invites are usually extended via their respective mailing lists, and they promote them on social media to try and encourage people who have never engaged with their organisations before to get involved as well. This is something that usually happens well over a year out from the election cycle, to make sure that we have plenty of time to consider all gender balance mechanisms available to us.
Thank you, Sarah. We do want to reach out to women as candidates, and that's an ongoing issue because you've got the UK. The question is how? How does your party reach out? Through our women's conference, through our mailings, through the work that we do in terms of the mentoring, to make sure that women are encouraged from the grassroots, and also links with the trade unions, so that they're positively encouraged to get involved. And it's not the pressure you have to stand if you get involved in the programme. Sometimes women will come back a couple of years later, having got that experience. So it's definitely an issue about promoting women's involvement at every level, but also not just in the run-up to the actual elections, but in the years between as well.
Okay, thank you.
Anne?
Yeah, so in the Scottish Greens, each branch would be responsible for maintaining a relationship with the women that would be likely to stand as candidates, and supporting them. The Women's Network does some work with some training around that as well, to help get people ready when it comes to selection time. But obviously, when we talk about the sort of the electoral cycle, we've got the local elections, we've got the Westminster elections, and we tend to have the same candidates coming up, so that they get experience in standing in these, albeit unwinnable, seats for the Scottish Greens. It means that when we get to perhaps like Holyrood elections, we've got a little bank of candidates that are ready. But it would be down to branches to reach out and make sure that they're contacting their women.
James, thank you.
Yeah, I would say we do active recruitment and headhunting of potential candidates, both by the party and by the affiliate organisations, Women to Win, CW, SCB, throughout the party. And for example, in fact, tonight I'm doing an Ask Her to Stand session as part of that. I think, as the other panellists have said, in terms of when we would do that, I think that's a rolling process throughout the term. There are so many different elections in Scotland that actually people often come forward for one election, stand at another, and then stand in future. And it's about building up that experience, because it does take years, I think, to get through, for some people to get through the process. So doing that constantly on a revolving basis is really important, and that's what we do.
Thank you. Convener, back to you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Evelyn, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. Thanks for being here today. We heard in the previous panel there are various barriers to women coming forward and to actually standing at all. And we heard a lot about harassment and online abuse. What is your party doing to tackle this? Caelan first, please.
So this is something that we are looking at focusing more on the internal codes of conduct and complaints mechanisms aspect. Obviously, we're looking at the wider wraparound support, as I've mentioned, and the goal being that these internal structures will better address issues like discrimination and harassment that happens more likely to women, especially online. Within our party National Executive Committee, we've implemented various strands ranging from bullying and harassment to sexual harassment panels that mean that when women come forward with complaints, that this can be escalated in a more direct and specific way in the hope that there's a more tangible outcome to ensure that these behaviours aren't continually perpetuated within the party. But in terms of actions that we're taking more widely to encourage women to come forward, this is something where the messaging around the beginning steps of our candidate assessment process stress our diversity aims, encouraging applications specifically from women, disabled and BAME members in particular. And these kind of affirmative actions and targeted recruitment have helped us to achieve the 53% women that we have elected today, and hopefully we'll be able to replicate in the next election.
I suppose there's two things I'd want to highlight. Firstly is that we've got robust safeguarding mechanisms that are in place that enable, whether it's elected representatives or party activities or campaigning, so that there's a route to put in complaints to the party to make sure that attitudes are challenged if need be. And in terms of campaigning, that's particularly an issue about young people, to make sure they get both the support and the guidance. It's really critical for that. In terms of issues like online harassment, training support, the social media change that we've seen over the last few years is really huge. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of the networking we've got in terms of our women's network, and also building women's confidence, because the extent to which women can get harassment through social media is just unacceptable. And one thing I was made aware of recently is the work the Scottish Parliament has done on that. And I think that's really important to highlight, that there has to be a consequence if people are taking abusive action online. It doesn't matter which party it is, whether it's a candidate or whether it's an elected representative. There's something about us. We all need to challenge that together.
Yeah, so we've internally in the party, we've got quite a robust code of conduct that quite often we can quote that, we can use that to remind people of the rules and usually de-escalate any internal issues before they happen. We've also got a complaints procedure if it goes further than that. With regard to the online abuse that women receive, I'd say that we try to put in some measures that can protect our candidates, such as having a team of people around them that can check their emails or tweets or whatever. But it's such a wide societal issue that you know, it's very difficult to protect women against. Although we can create that peer-to-peer space and a safe space for them to come afterwards, but to stop it altogether is nigh on impossible.
So we also have a very clear code of conduct which applies to all members, and the general terms of membership include specifically things around anti-harassment, anti-bullying, tolerance and respect of others, as you would expect, and any breaches of those are subject to our party's complaints procedure. And in terms of kind of online abuse, as the other panellists have said, you know, this is really something that's evolving and is becoming a lot more prevalent in the last few years. And we similarly have, you know, networks and staff and volunteer support that we try and put around candidates to support them as much as they can through that.
Thanks for that. And my next question is about what work your party is undertaking in advance of 2026, and how might it differ from what you did in 2021? And I'll go to James first.
So our rules for 2026 have not yet been set or agreed. We're in the process of forming those. But at the moment, we're at a stage of recruiting candidates, of reaching out, of trying to identify candidates and go forward. So I can't really say how it differs from the 2021 election because those rules haven't been set yet. But certainly we are learning a lot of lessons from the 2021 process and the surveys of candidates that we did around those times, to make sure that rules, as they are being formed, take consideration of that. But the rules haven't been set yet.
So we've got some internal processes going on, again, like James said, inside the party. For our Holyrood 21 elections, all of our MSPs were elected on the list system, and we had a rule in place that all the lists would be topped by a woman unless there was an incumbent male in that position, and the result of that was that we elected 3 men and 5 women, which we're very proud of. And as much as we haven't really gone through that process for this upcoming election, I assume that we're going to adopt something similar again, where we try to raise the profile of women and try to put women into those positions that at the very least aren't already occupied by an incumbent male.
Well, we started inviting potential candidates to put their names forward, so that work is already underway. And the approach we've taken for the last few elections is to twin the constituency seats, so 2 seats, and of course we've got new parliamentary boundaries, so that work is ongoing at the moment until we have the detail. That's difficult to say exactly which seats are which, but what we've done the last few elections is twin the seats so that there's internal selection with all party members getting 2 votes. So they get vote for the preferential for the man they would like to see selected and a vote for a woman they would like to see selected. And we do that for the UK elections in this year's campaign. And then on the list, again, it's the highest vote gets to top the list, and then it's gender balanced after that. And in the 2021 election, we also had an internal party campaign called Step Aside Brother, which is to encourage the top man on the list to step aside to let a woman stand at top of the list. So that wasn't at all a requirement. That was just trying to make people aware of the fact inside the party that we wanted to maximise the number of women getting elected. So that's what we've done over the past few years, and it has worked. Thanks.
Kaylin? So our candidate assessment processes have begun with our applications closing last week. So we'll be undertaking our interviews and assessment training days in the coming weeks and months. And as I mentioned, all of the messaging around our candidate assessment when we invite people to apply stresses our diversity aims and encourages applications from women and those from diverse backgrounds. At the Scottish Parliament elections in both 2016 and 2021, we used all-female shortlists in constituency selections to increase female representation. And this came whereby we asked if a male incumbent MSP from the SNP were to be standing down, this was where the all-female shortlists were implemented. And following the initial use of this in 2016, in a limited number of seats, the number of retiring MSPs from the SNP in 2021 meant that a wider use of all-female shortlists gave us the opportunity for equal numbers of male and female constituency candidates. And the experience of the process in 2016, the first time that these all-female shortlists were used, showed us that there was generally very little resistance to this in our party, and instead that it was generally welcomed as a positive step, which enabled us to take the leap when it came to high levels of retirements in 2021. But while there's been some thought that it would take until the 2026 election cycle to achieve this parity, we were successful earlier than we thought, which has meant that we were having to re-navigate for this time around. But so there's an acceptance that work will be needed to maintain this position without the option of all-female shortlists. So it'll be looking at regional lists. And in the past, this has looked like giving our National Executive Committee the ability to place candidates onto the internal selection list. So if we receive applications and the successful applicants for each individual regional list aren't gender balanced, our National Executive Committee has the power to add women or those from any other diverse background onto this list, not only to give people or give our members more variety and options, but also to ensure that gender balance is more likely. But this decision is one for our National Executive Committee, and there's been no finalised decisions on this for 2026 as of yet.
And this is my final question, but the previous panel said it's really important. We've got to about 50% or so female representation in Parliament. So if we have strong female candidates and who are doing a very good job as an MSP right now, strong, competent women, and the previous panel spoke about there's a problem with retention of women and making sure they stay here in 2026. What is your party doing to make sure these women will still be here in 2026? Caelan.
Our main priority tends to be around gender-sensitive campaigning, and whether this comes to party policies, as I've mentioned earlier, making sure that creches are available and politics continues to be accessible to women once they're in the door to help them to continue to engage, but also in practices in terms of canvassing and chapping doors and making sure that this isn't an off-putting experience for women that get involved in our party. So we'll have buddy systems when people first get involved, and we generally have a policy that women won't go into tenement closes by themselves, and we try to make sure that this culture of understanding around differences in gendered experiences of politics is understood across the board within our branches. So this tends to help retain women at an activist level at our branches, and this is usually whereby women gain this sense of community and are more likely to have their political career supported to the point of standing for election.
I think one of the main things we do is to support women through campaigning, to make sure that they are involved, they're encouraged, and they know they're going to get that support. I think the issue about retention of women is something that cuts right across the parties. And if you look at the last election, 2021, we actually lost several women, I think it's about 5 or 6, who chose not to stand, all talented. Some of them had been very senior in their party. And there's an issue about the nature of being an MSP, things like decision time, creche access, and just what women are giving up by being elected. So I think there's something for all of us to reflect on in terms of the Parliament as parties, from the branch level to our National Executive Committee to our conferences. We do as much as we can to support women and to be positive. I think it has got tougher given the social media over the last few years, but I think more we can do together across party, I think, as well as internal to the party. I think that's absolutely critical. And if you look at where some of our candidates come from, we sometimes get councillors stand as parliamentarians, and the challenge of being elected as a female councillor is tougher than being elected parliamentarian, because the salary is tougher. If it's a single woman and you've got kids, that economic decision is much, much tougher. So I think there's something both about retention and also about thinking where women might come through as candidates who've already got good experience and how you support them to that process as well.
So with the Scottish Greens, obviously we're a very small party. We will have 4 female incumbents when it comes to the next Holyrood elections. To be honest, there's more that the wider party structure could do. I will imagine it will fall to me going and having conversations with all 4 of those women to make sure that they stand again. But that is where the Women's Network in the Scottish Greens comes in, where we provide that peer-to-peer support, and we do our best through branches as well to make women feel welcome and comfortable as best as we can.
I think you're absolutely right. The retention of female parliamentarians is a real issue, and I think I'd actually agree entirely with what Sarah said about it being an issue for all parties. I mean, I know at the last Scottish Parliament election, most of our female parliamentarians were standing down or not recontesting the election, and that's, that speaks to that issue. I think there's a wide range of reasons, often across parties, but I would want to have those conversations with all female parliamentarians about what the reasons might be, so that where there are party issues, those can be dealt with, and where there are cross-party issues, that we all work together to try and minimise that. But it is a real issue.
Just one final sup. To Caelan, please. If, and I know this is quite specific to our party, but if somebody came in a all-women list and is a sitting MSP and is very competent, very strong, doing a good job, will there be any protections in place from a male person coming in to challenge her?
This isn't something that I'm aware of conversations having taken place at a national executive level or our candidate assessment committee level, but it's definitely one that I'm happy to take away, and I think it's absolutely a valid point, and this is something we should prioritise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now move on to questions from Maggie Chapman, please.
Thanks very much, Karen, and good morning to the panel. Thank you. Oh, good afternoon now. Thank you for being with us today and for your comments so far. I want to just unpick a little bit of what you said and help us get a clearer picture. You've all in different ways mentioned things like codes of conduct, policies against bullying and harassment, and complaints processes that different parties have. And I suppose from your perspective, and this is maybe a bit of a cheeky question, but from your perspectives and given what you know and what you've heard today, do those processes work in terms of protecting and supporting women who are either elected, maybe considering standing as candidates, or maybe just want those non-elected positions of leadership in the party? And when I say non-elected, I mean non-elected to local government or to Parliament. There will be internal elections as well. But do they work? Are we able to use those mechanisms to support and protect women from the everyday misogyny, the microaggressions, the everyday sexism that we heard so clearly put to us this morning by the first panel? Caelan, I'll start with you and then just work my way along.
I think there is a substantial amount of work to be done across all parties, and I'll absolutely acknowledge that there's work to be done in the SNP on this as well. As I mentioned earlier, our party has a member code of conduct which includes reference to bullying, harassment, transgressions, which can be referred to our member conduct committee, or else our national secretary intervenes in situations where there's an agreement that behaviour has fallen short. But this is often stagnated or not kind of resulted in tangible progress in terms of long-term cultures. So this is what I mentioned earlier about the creation of our sexual harassment panels and bullying panel as well. And these answer directly to the Member Conduct Committee and our National Executive Committee, in the hope that having a more streamlined process will result in more material action around these issues. We also, as a backup, or not a backup, but as a separate stream of support, have confidential support services that are available to any member of our party that feels vulnerable as a result of an experience in association with being involved in our party and in politics. And this is a kind of last resort in the hope that we can focus our minds on moving forward to actual more tangible action in this. But there's definitely work to be done across parties, I think, in terms of the toxic culture that surrounds politics.
Okay. Thanks, Caelan. Sarah?
I think there's two things I would want to reflect on. The first is our approach, which is about safeguarding mechanisms, which eventually get escalated to the General Secretary, and we've got our National Executive Committee that any complaint would get worked through to, should it actually require action. But I think a lot of it is about having best practice guidance to people so that we don't go there in the first place. The second element I would highlight is the fact that our Women's Committee is a very strong internal party mechanism. So if it was an individual complaint, that would go through the party system to the General Secretary. If it was an issue about culture, that would be likely picked up by the Women's Committee and then pushed both to the National Executive Committee and the General Secretary. And I think it's I think it's fair to say the Women's Committee is not, it's not quiet. If there was any sense that there was an issue, those women would stand up and would require action to be taken. So it's not something that's it's a big issue in the party at the moment. And I think that's partly because of just that general expectation that if there are problems, they will get addressed, and you don't want to go there. So it's making sure you've got that good culture, but also the awareness as to what is expected of everybody, whether they're an activist, a party office bearer, or an elected representative.
Thanks, Sarah. And Anne?
So, yeah, we have a robust code of conduct, which on the whole, as Sarah was saying, we can hold people to account before it becomes an issue, usually. It's often, again, it falls to those volunteers within our party who are suffering the inequalities or are suffering the bullying or harassment to remind people of our code of conduct. So that is one issue there. We also do have a complaints procedure, and I will freely admit that I think that we've got some problems with our complaints procedure. We don't have a way in our party for anonymous whistleblowing. We don't have a way for anonymous complaints to be put. For example, if there was any sexual harassment going on, there's very limited ways within the Scottish Greens that can be redressed, which is a real failing. However, then it falls to that peer-to-peer support where we can rally around each other and provide a bubble of support around our women. But I'm very aware, as Talit said earlier, that it was about reporting and supporting, and we do the supporting really well. The reporting part is missing.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. And James.
So where there are any complaints or breaches of our code of conduct, they're referred to our party's management board and then potentially to the party's disciplinary committee, and that process is there. And in answer to your question, do I think it works? Yes, I do, but I think it's always under review for any deficiencies or any problems that might develop, and we're always happy to look at any criticisms or concerns around that. And I think just secondly, in terms of culture, for anyone who is an office bearer in the party at the level of the management board, disciplinary committee, candidates board, or if they're a local party chairman, they're required to undertake regular equality and inclusion training to make sure that that culture is there and that it's appropriate. So those are all things that we do, but if there's anything that we don't, we're obviously always happy to look at that and try and improve.
Okay, and thanks all for that. I appreciate there's a challenge there because you function as political parties, but in a wider society that is still patriarchal, still sexist, still misogynistic, and I think there is a real difficulty. You know, you can have the best processes, best systems in the world, but if the culture's wrong, and the context of that culture is still unequal, then you're pushing everything up a hill, probably backwards, and it doesn't feel very progressive. I suppose following on from that, you've also mentioned some of the formal rules around gender balancing mechanisms for candidates. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you promote gender equality within the parties. Some of you have already talked about this, but if you could just say a little bit more, because we focus on candidates and elected representatives because that's what the world sees. But so much of that actually comes from the structures and the support within our parties themselves. And again, I'll just go along. Could you say just a little bit more about how you ensure you get women and maybe women from women who are also disabled, women from minority ethnic backgrounds, into positions of leadership within your parties as well. So we're not just looking at those who get voted on by the public. Caelan, if I can start with you.
Probably a good example within the SNP is our National Executive Committee in itself, in the sense of the elections that take place every year at our conference, whereby we'll elect various group of conveners from each of the kind of diverse backgrounds that match up to our affiliate organisations. So where we have a convener of our SNP BAME group that is elected in and of itself at the SNP BAME conference, we also have a national BAME convener which is elected at our national conference, and the same will go for our women's convener and our women's group. our youth wing and then a youth officer, for example. So, for example, youth officer is one that I would argue that we would need to add on. The same for our LGBT wing. So the work is probably in making sure that this is the same across the board. But for the case of our disability convener, our BAME convener and our women's convener, this means that there are two strands whereby only people from these groups are elected onto our National Executive Committee to ensure that there's more options available to people from minority backgrounds to take part in our National Executive Committee, which then, in the same way as being elected to a Parliament, then means that the policies decided on and the approaches decided on are more reflective of our party itself. But beyond our National Executive Committee, in terms of getting women involved and keeping women involved, it is down to our branch structure. And I think there's a lot of work to do there in terms of making our branch meetings more enticing to young women and also more accessible in terms of disability, in terms of coming from minority ethnic backgrounds. But this is where our affiliates play a really strong role, and this is something that we're really proud of in the SNP and the strength that our affiliate organisations have. And they play a large part in encouraging and then retaining people from different backgrounds getting involved in the party, as it gives a kind of supplementary experience to just a branch experience alone.
Okay, thanks, Caitlin. Sarah?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about every level, and there's the issue about affiliates, encouraging them not just to have women involved in the structures, but also people from different backgrounds, so you get that diversity. So the affiliates are key. Trade unions are absolutely critical as well, in terms of there's a geography right across Scotland, so making sure that regardless of where you live, you have that access to get involved in our party and our affiliate structures. I mentioned Scottish Labour students earlier. That's really critical in terms of younger people being able to get involved and making sure that you've got a very open approach in Scottish Labour students in terms of women getting involved. Scottish Executive Committee, absolutely critical, because that's the architecture of who's in charge of the party, making sure that you've got women's representation that comes through from the affiliates, the branches. And then the Scottish Policy Forum that I mentioned earlier, that's critical in terms of developing our policy approach, not just in terms of the rules and regulations of the party. So I think it's making sure that all of those levels you've got both a mix of the diversity, but particular support for women and encouragement to get involved. And it's, the branches, you have to have 50-50 on your elected reps. And we have specific representatives, people from ethnic minorities, disabled rep, youth rep. And then the women's issue is not a women's rep so much as the 50-50 angle on it. So it's to try and make sure that's integrated.
Sarah? Anne?
Yeah, so in our party, we're a very grassroots party, so on branch levels, we have co-conveners at every level. So at the branch, we will always have at least one woman co-convener, and the other co-convener could be male, but is also often a woman. And then when we move up into that more national party structure, where we have different committees that organise different parts of our party. So we've got a policy committee that has two co-conveners. At least one must be a woman. At the moment, both are women. We have a membership committee, at least one of them has to be a woman, and so on. And then each of the co-conveners from these national committees sit in our party executive, with the only unbalanced top of any committee is the Women's Network Committee, where we have two women co-conveners. So actually our party executive ends up being skewed towards women because we end up having more seats on it that way. But we also believe that you have to see it to be it at every level. And so we noticed that in our branches where we have more active voices of women, we're able to bring up more women. And we see that in our policy committee, where we have two women at the top of our policy committee, and we get more women involved in writing our policy through that kind of... So it's that constant taking on those leadership roles to try to help up the woman that's coming next, maybe the younger woman or the woman that's a newer member of the party, to try to always be showing that that example.
Thanks. And James.
I think within our party, certainly I would point to the affiliated organisations that we have. So I've obviously mentioned Women to Win, Scottish Conservative Women's Organisation. And Scottish Conservative Friends of BAME are a good example of that. Scottish Young Conservatives are all really strong organisations within the culture and the organisation of the party, and that means that they are very active, very much in partnership with us. As a staff member, for example, I work very closely with these organisations on a weekly basis. And that's not just about supporting candidates, as you say, it's also about recruiting members and making sure that there are forums for members to be involved in whatever form. So I think the really strong affiliated organisations, we didn't necessarily have that sort of 5-6 years ago, is something that has ensured that there are spaces for everyone to be involved in the party and that we're looking to be as inclusive as we possibly can be.
Thanks. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, Convener. And I was going to say good morning, but it's good afternoon already. Good afternoon, panel, and thank you very much for your opening statements and all the information you've provided so far. My question is around the candidates list. So what action are you undertaking to ensure that women candidates are included in electable positions in party lists? Obviously, diversity is important, as I know too well, as one of the first women of colour and first Indian women coming into the Scottish Parliament. However, we all need to ensure that selections are merit-based and that women are placed on party lists because they would make an excellent elected official. Now, I know from personal experience, I can say that I would never have wanted my party to have elected me because of the colour of my skin or because they had to put me in a category. I would always have wanted to be elected or selected first and then elected on my ability. So I wanted to ask you the question, so how do your parties balance diversity and merit? And can I start with Keelan, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in terms of elected representatives and our candidate selection processes, we would be on the same page that the best legislation comes from lived experience, but it's about how we recruit that. And I think a main focus point is what you're saying about the kind of tokenistic behaviour and making sure that in the way that we get women involved, this ensures meaningful contributions rather than for the sake of tokenistic behaviours. Although what we find in terms of the downsides of our kind of hard gender balance mechanisms that we had in the past is that those that do claim that those are elected using such steps and mechanisms are somehow less qualified than others, but this tends to only really be exclusively said by those who've never faced the barriers of any of these characteristics. So it's a nuanced conversation to have, and it is something that we consider useful, even though it may seem tokenistic on the surface, but it's about this continual support and making sure that if we're in a situation whereby with us focusing on regional lists, that there are no women or no one from a disabled background or minority ethnic background, that we have meaningful and substantive conversations with women before we ask them to go through the assessment process to be added onto these lists at a later date. So it's about balancing these two things, but I also think they do work hand in hand.
Thank you. Sarah?
Well, I would say it's hugely competitive. So a lot of the stuff we've talked about earlier about encouraging women to stand in particular and giving them support and having that profile is important. When it comes down to it, the twinning of the constituency seats and then the ranked order on the list, it is hugely competitive, and people can get nominated by affiliates. So it could be trade unions or environmental organisations. They get to meet members on a one-to-one, and members get to ask them questions. We have hustings internally to the party, and you can have huge numbers of the members actually turning up to them. So it's very competitive, and that's partly where the encouragement and training before you get to that stage is crucial, so that people are not thrown in at the deep end, that they know what they're going to be challenged with, and they can step up to it with their professional, their political interests and ambitions. And I think that's how we deliver it. And then they get to speak to the constituents. So it's quite a long process when you think about it, but we've tried to make it open and accessible, and at the end of the day, the members are up for that and they get involved in that process.
Thank you, Sarah. Anne?
Yeah, so on our sort of regional lists, it's open to the members of that region to vote on them. We rely on candidates coming forward themselves, and then there will be hustings and such, and then all the members that live in that region will get to vote on who they want to see at the top of that list. We occasionally have balanced up women in the past, but when we've done some internal research, we have found that on the whole, women tend to be better qualified. So we do think that there's a bit of the structural, societal sexism that comes into play a little bit, perhaps, where men are getting a few more votes, perhaps the way that they come across in hustings and such like. But on occasion we've had to balance up the women, but it doesn't happen all the time. And then we tend to, if needed, we do a zip type, you know, one woman, one man, one woman, one man, so on. And but across the range, and I think we were talking earlier about winnable seats in the Scottish Greens more widely, we must have 40% of our candidates must be women for any election. But if it's in a seat that we've identified as winnable, that has to be 50% of our candidates must be women. So we up our game there to make sure that we've got more women in positions that are more likely to be won.
But Anne, sorry, can I just probe on that a little bit? But how do you balance the merit and the diversity side there? Because having quotas is all good, but what if, like I said, my own personal experience, I hope I got on my ability. I probably could ask my director that, yeah. But I think it's important that looking at that merit and diversity, how do you balance that when you've got quotas?
So I think that another thing, and again, it's something that Talit brought up earlier, was about the historical inequality of access and inequality of opportunity. So there is, to create an equity, I think we do need to lift some demographics in our society up a little bit to give them that equal access, because we don't have equal access for people with disabilities, people from working class backgrounds, women and so on. So there occasionally has to be a little bit of a helping hand, but I don't think that you know, that doesn't trump what maybe a man has achieved if he's genuinely better qualified or in a better position for the job. But it just gives a little bit of a boost to a woman, especially where you've got that list situation where you can zip lock. So you're still getting the women who are the best women at the top of the list, and you're still getting the men who are the best men at the top of the list.
Thank you, Anne. James.
So we don't have a form of quotas, but candidates are selected by members and supporters, and that is in our case based on merit. We have monitoring of meetings and of selection processes to make sure that rules are followed and that selections are done based on merit and not on any other factors. And in terms of, you also mentioned just kind of in terms of winnable seats, and as Anne said, that was mentioned earlier. I think at the last election, about 26% of our candidates overall were female, but in our winnable seats, 35% of candidates were female, so they were statistically more likely to be standing in winnable seats. And as I said, in terms of new MSPs who were elected that election, 50% were female. So I think our system is merit-based, but it's really important we're looking at how many women come through, and more generally the diversity of that group, so that we can be sure that we've got a fully open and meritocratic system.
Thank you. My next question is around the last panel we took evidence from, spoke about the importance of collecting data on the diversity of candidates. This meaning obviously them as organisations collecting the data and doing the research, but also very importantly for yourselves as today representatives from the parties. So are you in support that your party should be collecting this data and publishing this data on candidates? And if you can give me an answer on that. This time I'm going to move it around a little bit. Sarah, if you want to go first.
Okay, well, we definitely have the data on candidates. I suppose the issue is about whether you want it published or not. And for me, I would be thinking about UK, Scottish and council elections. It's thinking through all of those electoral opportunities. And one of the things I've been thinking as I've been listening to all the witnesses is I'm going to do a feedback session to the party, because it's kind of interesting hearing people in different parties and also the previous panel in terms of these issues. And I think once you've done your report, I think sending it to all of us to make us reflect on, is there more you can be doing? So I think that would be my response on that one. The data candidates, we've got the who's elected, we know who was nominated. Part of the challenge is it is 50-50. You don't know when you select people what your numbers are actually going to be. And you know where your best chances are, but we elect people on that's where the candidates wanted to stand and they give it their all. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically going to get elected, because that's up to the voters at the end of the day. So I think there's a bit of reflection that we probably all need to take post these conversations.
Thank you, Sarah. James?
Yes, it's we publish that data already on a voluntary basis for UK parliamentary, Scottish parliamentary and council elections. So we have done so for a number of years.
Thank you. Anne?
We haven't been effectively and consistently gathering candidate data. We definitely should, and I see value in doing that. Where we have limited data, we share that with Elect Ireland and Gender whenever they approach us to ask for it. I've got no issue with us sharing that data, assuming that it would be appropriately anonymised.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely in support of publishing without impacting on kind of individual privacy. It's one of the ways that we've managed to succeed in that over 50% representation in the Scottish Parliament is by tracking this data. One thing, just based off of what Sarah was mentioning, that we could potentially expand on is that we do have feedback sessions from our candidates after an election, but potentially to expand this also to women who have gone through our candidate assessment process and either not been selected or indeed successful in passing the candidate assessment process would be helpful as well, I think. We began tracking female representation over 20 years ago, is my understanding, in the party. Obviously, I didn't work there then. But looking at the number of applicants, those who were successfully assessed, those seeking selection, being selected, the number elected, is what allowed us to identify that the problem within our party came from the application stage. We actually have a scenario where majority of the women who come forward in our party to be assessed are approved, and then our mechanisms in place are solid enough in supporting women to the election stage, but where we fall down is in the number of women applying in the first place. And this is where we have taken steps over a number of years to overcome this issue. And that, yeah, to intervene later on to ensure that more women find themselves in winnable positions as well as a key aspect of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to questions from Paul O'Kane, please.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning to the panel. In the previous panel, I'd asked a question about legislative interventions for quotas in particular. Ireland is currently having a general election in which, for the first time, 40% of candidates will be required to be women, or political parties there won't receive state funding. Obviously, they have a different system in that they state fund political parties. Obviously, we do have mechanisms both in Scotland and at the UK level of how we fund political parties, whether that be short money or money to leaders' allowances and things. I mean, is that something that the political parties feel merits exploration, or is that something that you know, people would shy away from, I suppose, in terms of that wider conversation? Don't all rush at once now. All right.
Yeah, we'll start with Anne. Anne has indicated.
You're welcome to come out on that. That's fine. Yeah, I think that there's again, as was said earlier, there's a lot of research that's gone on in this area by the likes of Elect Ireland and Gender and 50-50, and I think that it would be really useful to have that legislative framework to encourage parties. I think that the Scottish Greens already do that. So yeah, I think that it would be great. That how we would do it, I think, is more challenging because, as you say, we don't have state funding anyway. So, that would take some exploration. But I think that I would welcome some barrier, as it were, to say like you have to be at least this competent, this level of gender balance before you're accepted into such and such.
James, you indicated.
I think that's not necessarily something we would advocate for, but I think, as Anne says, there's a lot of questions around how that might work. Obviously, you know, in Ireland, they have a different electoral system, so that often ends up with candidates being placed, for example, at the last minute in less winnable positions. So I think there are kind of you know, there are disadvantages to going down that avenue, but it's something that would need looked at. But I don't necessarily think it's something that we would advocate for.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think where we've come from in the Scottish Parliament is we've done the 50-50 since day one. It hasn't always delivered us 50% of our elected reps, going from the candidates to the actual reps. I think part of it is sharing best practice. There's definitely been a political aspiration that has been spread across the parties that this is something we should all do. So I would be interested both in a bit of analysis about the Irish situation you mentioned, also understand in Wales, they've been discussing that issue of gender balancing as well. So I think there's something about, it'd be good to look at other legislatures and see what difference it's made, what the benefits are, and have that as one of your options to look at. So I wouldn't automatically go down that route, but I think actually asking that question is going to make us all reflect. So I think I'd be looking at where the evidence is in terms of what happens, because what we've had is a voluntary approach that has got stronger in the last 25 years. But as others have said, it's not a guarantee, and it doesn't mean at every election that is going to happen. So I think it'd be good to do a bit more follow-up work on that and a bit of reflection about what really works.
Thank you. Kaylin, would you like to?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it sounds like something that's definitely worth exploring. As much as we've discussed the culture around politics and making sure that it's a cultural change and a cultural shift, there also does need to be legislation to back that up. So I think it does sound like a really interesting way of making sure that this is a cross-party effort, and following that as what you were saying about the Welsh explorations as well. I think in terms of making sure there's uniform advice and mechanisms in place across all political parties would help us further this.
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks, Convener. Wales was actually my other point, so I think that's been covered. So I'm happy to hand back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Tess White has indicated that she would like to come in.
Thank you. So before becoming an MSP, I worked in HR for over 3 decades. So diversity and inclusion is part of my DNA. But there is a balance to be struck. So my final question to the panel, and really it's a yes or no for each of the panel members. In looking at all women shortlists, does your party consider a trans woman to be considered on that all women shortlist? So a very quick yes or no. And I realise that it is a sensitive topic, but also guidance on how you as a political party navigate this. So thank you. Sarah, would you like to go first?
Yeah, and I can't answer that directly because I've not been that close to the actual selection process, but we could definitely get you that response.
Thank you. Kaylin?
Yes, absolutely. We have a written definition of transphobia within our party National Executive Committee that's been approved, and this is something that we would stand by within the processes of our internal selections.
Thank you, Anne.
Yes, as Caitlin said, yeah, the same.
Okay, James?
We don't have all women shortlists, so it wouldn't be able to apply.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, Tess, it's not all women shortlist because we've got that twinning kind of approach.
You've got the twinning. Do you have zipping as well?
Yeah, so I will get back to you on it.
Okay,
just
I'll just get back to the committee. Thank you.
That's what I meant, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you. That brings us to a close of this panel. Are members content that they have asked everything they would like to? And have our witnesses today, are they content that they've said everything they would like to say so far? Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming along. And we will now move into private to consider the rest of our business on our agenda. Thank you.